a full sermon written out here, and I'm going to ask Joanne to send it to anyone who would like to read it, but I'm going to give you the high points right now. And I'm going to also read the two stories that I have included in it. I'm starting with Dr. Martin Luther King's saying, "Darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that." Now, it's my personal opinion that the violence we're seeing, that these young men, and it is young men that are doing it, really is a product of the toxic social environment that we have created, that we all have created, where there's so much hate and judgment and that kind of stuff going on. I think that our country is facing a serious existential crisis because so many of us are harboring so much hate against others of us. And of course, hate is based on fear. And what I'm saying is that the idea I'm trying to get across here is that we can address this, that there is something that religious, spiritual people can do about this to help the situation. And that is to create, when you're in a conversation with someone with whom you are in conflict, especially with someone who you are in very strict political conflict. And I have made a hobby, I suppose, of searching people out like that and engaging them in conversation, because that, I think, is where we can actually do some good. And I think we do some good by entering into a conversation, by creating a space to be for both conversants. Now, what do I mean by space to be? Well, space to be is just a fancy theological way of saying love, but space to be is a little more accessible. That is a space to be who you are, to think what you think, and to be an authentic person, no matter what side of the political or religious gulf you are on. So let me read it. This is a story, not a story. It happened actually, if I look at it, 6 years ago, and I've used it here before. Many of you have probably heard it, but it's one of those rare instances where I got everything right and was able to create a space with someone with whom I was in disagreement. So I begin with an experience I had while walking to the convention center in Columbus, Ohio, for the first day of the 2016 UUA General Assembly. My hotel was 3/4 of a mile away from the convention center. Walking there the first day, uncertain where the center was, I had my head buried in my phone, following a street map of Columbus. A young man who was maybe 19 or 20 and dressed in all black stepped in front of me and said, "Would you like to take a pamphlet, sir?" So as he thrust into my hand a glossy pamphlet with a picture of a dismembered aborted fetus on the cover. I noticed that there were other young people, all probably in their late teens or early 20s, college-age students, 8 of them by count, dressed in black, occupying the 4 corners of the intersection and also handing out pamphlets. The young man and his group were there to protest the position most UUs take on women's reproductive rights. I thanked the young man for the pamphlet, but kept my place on the sidewalk so as to engage in conversation. I said, "This is a very disturbing picture." The young man responded, "We are here to educate people on the horror of the tens of thousands of children who are murdered each year in this country." "Yes," I said, "abortion is something I have a very hard time with." "So you agree," the young man said, "that abortion should be outlawed?" "No," I said, "I do not like abortion, but I dislike the idea of the state legislating what a woman does with her body much more." But the young man said, "Abortion is against the will of God." I said, "That is a very powerful statement." would you mind telling me how you know what the will of God is? He responded, the will of God is revealed in the Bible. Another powerful statement, I said. If you have the time, could you tell me how you know this about the Bible? The young man fell silent for a few seconds and finally responded, I know the Bible is the word of God through faith. How did you come by that faith? I asked. Again, a brief silence. I guess I chose it because it seems like the right thing to do. I said, I too have chosen faith. My faith is in humanity. I have faith that is frail and as prone to mistakes as we humans often are. It is most important that we have the freedom to choose and that in our choosing, the voice of the sacred is heard. The young man said, how can we ever know what to do then? I responded, I think that is a very important question for you. Personally, I don't think we really ever do know exactly what to do. That is why it takes faith to live a courageous life. That is why I am thankful for this conversation. I like to imagine that the Holy is speaking through you and through me as we stand on the street corner and wrestle with the ethics of abortion. And we parted with a handshake. And I kept the pamphlet. At any rate, being able to create a space in a conversation like that with someone with whom you are in radical disagreement really begins with doing your inner spiritual work. And that is creating the space inside you to do the spiritual work. Now, how do you do that? Or where does that begin? Well, it really begins with those really, really difficult feelings that come to you. Now, what most of us do is when a difficult feeling comes to us, we just pass it right on. We don't want to deal with it. So we immediately we project it onto project villainy onto somebody else. We scapegoat somebody else. And what I'm recommending as a spiritual discipline for creating a space within you is to keep that feeling, to catch a hold of it, to sit with it and let it instruct you, because it will instruct you. But what it will teach you eventually is a little bit about grace, and a little bit about the fact that we really don't know what to do with this, how to be in it. That the only way to really know is when the creative spirit comes to us. But in creating that space, we also create a space for the creative spirit, or the Holy Spirit, to act in us and be a form of information. But creating that space within and creating that space to be, and once again, creating a space to be is a definition, or a definition of love, is important, because when we love when we can love ourselves, love all those crappy, disturbing, unbalancing, villainous, disturbing thoughts that we have. We have a lot of them. Then we can learn to tolerate them in someone else, and tolerating them in someone else is grace. And then you can hear what someone is saying, to really be present with them. And in creating that space, the creative spirit does seem to operate. And then you're not going to change any minds, almost certainly. But what you may do is you may reduce the level of toxic scapegoating that is contributing to the political difficulties we are having in this country, and certainly giving birth to these young men that are going out and shooting up schools and factories and other places of work. So I'd like then to read one more story that I have here. And this is much more recent than 6 years ago. I'd just like to add that scapegoating, being the kind of person that can help other people scapegoat, can make you a very powerful person. I think of Adolf Hitler, how he scapegoated the Jews. Think of, and I'll just say our former president. Think how powerful a group of people he had behind them, because he had been able to help people unload those things that they should be bearing for themselves. So what I'm really talking about, taking responsibility for yourself, taking responsibility for your feelings, because when you do that, good things can happen. At any rate, let me go here. Like I said, if you really want to read the sermon, it is 10 pages long, but I will send it to you. A couple of weeks ago, Patty and I traveled to Arizona to pack up my 93-year-old mother-in-law's household so she could move to an assisted living facility in North Dakota, where, except for my wife and I, all her family lives. While in Arizona, I happened to have a fairly lengthy conversation with one of my mother-in-law's friends. He is a gentleman in his mid-70s and a retired Chief Master Sergeant, the highest enlisted rank one can attain in the U.S. Air Force. I was in my early adulthood an Air Force navigator, so we had a lot to talk about. My initial take on the sergeant was that he was an intelligent and kindly individual who had accomplished much in his life. I took note that he was wearing a very nice leather belt with a large buckle that identified him as a member of the National Rifle Association. After some reminiscing about our times in the Air Force, the conversation turned to the war in Ukraine. He advanced the theory that Bill Gates, in collaboration with Vladimir Putin, had orchestrated the war for financial gain. My initial unspoken response was, wow, that is crazy. But that was not his point of view. I was able to create space. Fortunately, I remembered who I am and what I stand for. And further, that it is my job to bring grace and healing, to stand on the side of love and not to be an irritant to an already inflamed wound. I said, I had not heard that. Where are you getting this information on Gates and Putin? The sergeant informed me that he had heard it from his favorite preacher, a person who calls himself a Jewish Christian who occasionally speaks at political rallies and holds services around the different retirement communities in Phoenix and Mesa. I replied in a calm manner, gee, it is hard for me to believe that Bill Gates would involve himself in something like that, given his rather extensive record of philanthropy. His foundation has, for instance, given my son, who is a scientist, quite a lot of money to develop a vaccine for a troublesome microorganism called a Acinetobacter, a virulent pathogen that is passed around in hospitals and causes many deaths a year. It just seems unlikely that he would do something that like invoke a war to make more money. I continued, where does your preacher get his information? The sergeant reflected for a bit and then said he did not know, but that he, the preacher, seemed very confident about that information. I sighed and said, it is just hard to know what the truth is. Interestingly, the sergeant mimicked my sigh and said, it is really hard. I guess you really can't be sure of anything. Our conversation moved on to other less flammable topics. I considered the conversation a win, not because I changed the sergeant's opinion, I didn't, but because it will probably be more difficult for him and me to, in the future, to involve ourselves in scapegoating others and contributing to our current national crisis. The bottom line of the sermon is that don't try to escape your difficult emotions. Invite them in and let them teach you about grace. When love becomes your way of connecting to yourself and others, you gain a sense of mastery because you have stopped contributing to the problem, the toxicity that exists in our nation. Further, you may find yourself feeling really thankful for the being alive, and you may even from time to time catch the vision that we truly are all one. All this bounty comes from standing with love, creating for yourself and for others a space to be, and that's be with a capital B. Maybe Jesus was onto something when he said, love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you, and bless those who curse you. And now, my friends, let's move to our final hymn.